Content warning. Paradox Live includes themes of trauma, child abuse and neglect, violence, suicide, death, human experimentation, and gang activity. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey there, heads. I hope you've all been well. With November winding down, we're on the cusp of the winter holiday season, and I'll have a bit more free time for creative endeavors. On the flip side, that also means that the anime season is coming to a close, and so plot points are going to be resolved pretty quickly. I know I have the content warning at the start of every video, but before I get too far into things, I do want to state that this video will include the discussion of a canonical suicide attempt. This will happen in the summary of the second love droppa, and will be touched on again in the takeaway portion. If this is something you don't feel comfortable with, feel free to skip it, or just click off this video entirely. Mental health is health, and I don't want anyone feeling pressured to strain themselves for the sake of a Japanese media project. With that being said, let's begin. Love is the 5th stage battle and featured the Cat's Whiskers versus Cosmets. At this point, each team had had one win and one loss, so the competition was anyone's game. The first drop-up begins where the final part of the exhibition show left off. Shiki explains to Ryu that he's afraid that the ghost seen in the haunted building is in fact his friend who he killed. Ryu, naturally, doesn't believe that Shiki would be capable of such an act and laughs off the confession as a joke. Ryu tells him that he did really see a ghost, that of a boy staring up at the sky, and he muses that maybe he's looking up because he likes the view. He warns Shiki, though, that if he only looks up at what he wants to see, he'll miss out on the other things around him. Ghosts, he says, are only scary because they can't be properly seen. Yohei interrupts this tense conversation by bringing Shiki some vegetable risotto, which he cooked as a late-night snack for the boy. Ryu confuses it for ojia, or rice porridge, and begins to loudly demand to have some. Yohei manages to wrangle him up, and he tells Shiki that even though it's not really Yohei's business, he's there to help if Shiki is willing to talk. As Yohei and Ryu retreat from the apartment down to the bar, Shiki reflects on Ryu's odd comments and resolves to go out and look for himself, to face what happened on that fateful night. Meanwhile, at the twins' apartment, Kanata is having a nightmare and is awoken by Nayuta. Confused and momentarily disoriented, Kanata panics and grabs for Nayuta. He admits that, in his dream, Nayuta had disappeared and he was running around frantically looking for him. When he had finally been able to find him, Kanata was horrified to discover Nayuta bleeding and battered in the shadow of an unfamiliar building. Nayuta weakly apologized to Kanata, but became intangible when reached for. Kanata pleaded desperately for Nayuta to stay with him, not to leave him alone like this, and his screams were drowned out by the sounds of passing trains. Kanata shares how anxious he was when the Nayuta in his dream slipped out of his grasp, but his brother only gives a non-committal grunt and checks his forehead. Announcing that Kanata has a fever, Nayuta says that he will go out and get some medicine, and he leaves the reluctant Kanata in the apartment to rest. The members of the Cat's Whiskers are closing up the bar for the night when Shiki asks Yohei if he can go out for a bit. When asked, he denies Ryu's request to accompany him and heads off to the building where he and Nayuta used to spend time, recalling to himself that 2 years ago he had been on this very rooftop when he had killed his friend. Opening the roof access door, he calls out to Nayuta. The second drop-up begins with a flashback as Shiki explains the events that led to tragedy. He'd met Nayuta when he was in middle school, just after having been taken in by Simon. Shiki had run into trouble while in the slums, but was saved by Nayuta, who had been passing by at an opportune moment. Though Nayuta's motivation to act was more based in a distaste for the men troubling Shiki, the two would ultimately become friends. As it turned out, Nayuta had been keeping some things secret from his brother. Very aware of how overly protective Kanata could be, the younger twin kept his rooftop sanctuary and new friend a secret, as well as the part-time job he got to help ease Kanata's financial responsibilities. His part-time job, however, was taking part in clinical trials, and this worried Shiki as he watched Nayuta become more sickly. Finally, Shiki would be called to the rooftop by Nayuta, who said he wanted to see his friend one last time and return an album he had borrowed. Nayuta, standing precariously on the edge of the roof, revealed that he was already suffering from metal erosion and that he planned to end his life before it could get any worse. He didn't want to burden Kanata with the severity of his health condition, and falling victim to his phantom metal meant that they wouldn't be able to continue their hip-hop career. Unwilling to let his beloved brother see him in this state, Nayuta had instead called upon his friend to accompany him in his final moments. Shiki pleaded with Nayuta to step away from the edge, to reconsider, but ultimately he was powerless to stop him. Just a middle school-aged student, Shiki was terrified when he saw Nayuta's arm ravaged by phantom metal, too frightened to reach out and grab hold of him. Panicked and grief-stricken, Shiki took his album and ran without calling for anyone, leaving Nayuta to die. As Shiki weeps over his recollection of the event, apologizing to Nayuta for being a poor excuse for a friend, Nayuta appears to ask him what he's muttering to himself about. Shiki reasons that someone must have saved Nayuta, and he says that he felt immense relief upon seeing Nayuta at Club Paradox at the beginning of the competition. Nayuta, however, does not demonstrate any awareness of Shiki beyond recognizing him as a member of the Cat's Whiskers. Shiki asks if Nayuta is possibly angry at him for having run off, and so is pretending not to know him. He also wonders if Nayuta might have lost his memories after the incident. Nayuta rejects both of these notions and tells Shiki to get lost. Shaken, but still happy to know that Nayuta is alive and well, Shiki retreats. As he makes his way back home, Shiki thinks to himself that it's probably best that Nayuta has forgotten him, because he was such a horrible friend. Yohei calls out to Shiki, having gone looking for him after he hadn't returned. When asked what's wrong, Shiki tearfully explains that something happy and sad has happened. His dear friend is alive, but he no longer wants anything to do with him. Yohei tells him it's alright to cry, and he does his best to comfort Shiki. At Bar 7-4, Ryu is crying because Shiki left him behind and presumably hates him. Simon reassures him that this isn't the case, but that Shiki in fact cares for him deeply and doesn't want to lose him. Simon further explains that humans are weak and can't live alone, and that the loneliness of being left by a loved one can either make a person resilient or can destroy them. Ryu wonders if Simon can really be a teacher because he's making everything seem very complicated. Nayuta returns to the apartment with medicine and food for Kanata. Saying that it will be a problem for him if Kanata doesn't recover, he begins preparing him something to eat. Nayuta then says that the two of them must beat the Cat's Whiskers in their next battle. Obviously, this drama track is rather emotionally heavy, and the situation surrounding Nayuta continues to grow stranger. Up to this point, there have been some odd moments regarding Nayuta, such as his disappearance and abrupt reappearance in Family, and his uneaten gyoza in the exhibition show. Now we know that Nayuta attempted to take his own life 2 years before the start of the series, after suffering the effects of phantom metal erosion. Shiki, the sole witness of this attempt, is burdened with guilt for not having been able to stop him, and for being so frightened that he fled the scene rather than calling for help or trying to render aid. Kanata's bad dream in the first drapa suggests that he might have, in fact, encountered Nayuta after this attempt. Keep in mind that the task Iori employs Kanata to do involves him salvaging phantom metals from the bodies of erosion victims. On a lighter note, the Cat's Whiskers group is shown opening up to each other in this drama. As the walls between them begin to fall and they allow themselves to mourn their losses, they are able to reinforce their shared bonds as members. Ultimately, Cosmez would go on to win the stage battle with their song Ain't No Love, defeating the Cat's Whiskers' Mercy. The final stage battle of the first round of the Paradox Live was Vibes, featuring Bei vs. Akan Yatsura. The first drop-up opens with the best group. The Akan Yatsura boys are chattering excitedly amongst themselves as they look out over the audience that's gathered. Meanwhile, Iori and Zen speak privately amongst themselves. Iori has been gathering intel, and it seems that the culprit behind the raid on the Suiseki Gumi was indeed in contact with Alter Trigger. With his suspicions confirmed, Iori muses about the larger picture and what it is that Alter Trigger is trying to accomplish through the organization of the Paradox Live event. Zen says that regardless of the strangeness behind the scenes, they should face the competition head-on as Phantom Metal rappers. Further discussion is interrupted when the boys rejoin them, hyped up by the particularly large crowd. This being the final stage battle of the competition, the heads have come out in droves to find out firsthand which team will win the 10 billion yen cash prize and the opportunity to compete against Budokan. In Bei's dressing room, the trio prepares to take the stage. Alan and Anne are both chatting anxiously as they fidget and pace to expel nervous energy. They note that only Hajun seems to have any sort of composure, but when Alan reaches out to try and encourage Hajun to let loose in front of them, Hajun snaps at Alan not to touch him. Seemingly self-conscious of his sudden outburst, Hajun tells Alan and Anne that they have no choice but to win today. To prove the validity of their existence, to show the world that rejected them, the members of Bei are determined to take the victory. When they begin performing their song, however, Hajun suddenly collapses. The second drop-up begins with the members of Akan rushing over to meet Bei. The boys all express their concern, asking if Hajun is alright and if Alan and Anne know what happened. When Anne points out that Hajun's hand is discolored, however, Iori and Zen recognize the symptoms immediately. Iori explains that this is an acute case of phantom metal erosion. Some people have stronger resistance to phantom metal, but others are more susceptible to encountering such effects. When the beginning stages of erosion are observed, the affected person should stop using their phantom metal or risk greater bodily harm. As Iori looks Hajun over, he sees its extensive spread and remarks that Hajun must have suffered greatly to this point, but that it's too late. When the metal erosion reaches the heart, the process is too far along to stop. Alan insists that they call an ambulance, that Hajun can surely be saved, but Iori loudly insists that it's no use. As he starts to walk off, Satsuki asks him what will happen to Hajun, forcing Iori to admit that the metal will simply consume him and that he will die. Iori gruffly apologizes to the boys, saying that he didn't want them to know the risks of using phantom metal, but in doing so, he had been using them and taking advantage of their trust. Hokusai speaks up, telling him that they had already known of the dangers all along. Reo agrees, saying that they had known the reality of the phantom metals, as well as the fact that Iori and Zen had tried to conceal it in an attempt to protect them. Satsuki, it seems, was the only one who had not been aware of the risks. The three boys conclude that despite the dangers, they'd never felt used by Iori and Zen, and instead they were happy to perform together as Akan and were willing to put their lives on the line to do so. They insist, however, that there must be something that can be done to save Hajun. In the background of this heartfelt family moment, Alan and Anne are still fretting at Hajun's side. They chime in with their own pleas to Iori, begging him for any information or insight into what they can do. With everyone looking to him expectantly, Iori admits there's one thing that they can try, but he can't guarantee that it will work. The only known instance of someone saving another from acute metal erosion was allegedly Shuda, a Buraikan who saved his partner Yasha after the latter collapsed on stage. Iori admits that it's a long shot and that it could all be hearsay, but he explains that Alan and Anne will have to kiss Hajun's phantom metal to activate it and enter his mind to retrieve his consciousness. He warns the two that this will not be an easy task and that if anything goes wrong, they will be trapped alongside Hajun and will perish. Alan and Anne, however, show no reluctance in their intentions, earning Iori's admiration and the encouragement of the other members of Akan. The other unit then moves to take the stage to buy time while Alan and Anne kiss Hajun's ring and travel into his mind. The two wake up in a dark space, lit only by the light coming from an open door. As they approach, they can hear the voices of Hajun's parents dismissing their son and telling him that he is unnecessary in their home. Alan bursts through the door, declaring that Hajun is absolutely not unnecessary, and Anne follows to tell Hajun's parents that they're the ones who are unwanted. Hajun's parents disappear, leaving the child Hajun behind. Alan and Anne approach him, Anne commenting on how adorable Hajun is as a child. Alan reiterates to Hajun that he needs to ignore his parents because he is absolutely not unnecessary to his friends. Anne backs him up, saying that even though Hajun puts on a cold face, they know he can be kind and dedicated, and they love him despite his nasty personality. Alan apologizes to Hajun for not having noticed him struggling sooner, and he echoes their conversation in pride, asking him not to be such a stranger to his friends. Hajun replies that he hides the weak and needy parts of him out of fear of being abandoned. Being cast aside by people he loves is a scarier prospect than dying, so he suffered silently in order to continue to be useful to the others. Alan tells him to stop being stupid, repeating that he would never abandon him. When the child Hajun hesitates, Anne and Alan explain that they understand how scary it is to walk away, even from toxic environments, but they reassure him that they've both done so before. They tell him that they've got their own monsters haunting their own rooms within them, and while the pain will always exist, they have the power to leave. Hajun takes their offered hands and is pulled along by his friends, bidding his parents a farewell as they exit the door. Back in reality, Alan and Anne wake up and tackle Hajun, crying with relief when they realize he's alright. The members of Akan return from the stage, relieved to see that Hajun has recovered. Yuri is very interested in how everything is played out, but insists that they can talk later as the crowd is all hyped up after the Akan performance, and it's Bei's turn. Alan asks if Hajun is feeling up to the task, and Hajun replies stubbornly that he's perfect as usual. Though his unit members are worried about him, Hajun tells them that he can go anywhere so long as they're all able to go together. The three then take to the stage once more. In the end, Bei's Fabulous would go on to defeat Akan Rowdy's Akan wanted vibes. In this drama, we see the conclusion of Hajun's secret alley dealings, alluded to in Desire and witnessed in the exhibition show. The anime has even strengthened this foreshadowing, with Hajun taking medication and being seen consulting a doctor. It also makes me wonder if his reaction in Pride to Ryu's comment was possibly also influenced by the slow breakdown of his health. We also get the payoff to the implied secret Yori and Sen have been keeping from the boys. This has been a recurring theme since Family, with Kanata basically accusing Yori and Zen of not explaining the full risks of the phantom metals to the boys, and it was a concern Zen had at the exhibition show. However, because the Vibes drama is ultimately Bay-centered, this bit of drama is easily swept to the side in the grand scheme of things. Following these two stage battles, the cumulative points for all the matches were totaled, and Cosmos was declared the winner, followed by Bei, Akan Yatsura, and the Cat's Whiskers, respectively. With the 10 billion yen, the twins will be able to escape their lives of poverty and achieve greater success in the hip-hop scene. But there are still some questions that have yet to be answered. Final thoughts. I do like that these two dramas circle back around a lot, the theme of pain and trauma as a catalyst to create hip-hop. I think it's very interesting how the series conceptualizes the genre as something that is used by the persecuted and victims of injustice to create something powerful. To this point, I particularly liked a comment by Anne that a room containing trauma will exist within Hajun even when he's an old man, and that it will always hurt, but that he has the power to decide whether he leaves or stays. While trauma is obviously complex and different people process it in a variety of ways, I think that there's some validity to the statement. I like that it's acknowledged that these hurts may never disappear entirely, but that eventually we can decide how much of our lives are affected by them. As a sixth man, I'm still pretty devastated that Rowdy's lost in the Vibes round. If you hadn't already heard it, I strongly urge you to do so because it's such a banger. It's the kind of song that makes me think that I can dance my way to victory in a fistfight against 20 men. My biased viewpoint also requires that I point out in the drama that Iori apologized to the boys in a very serious tone, abandoning his usual bombastic manner and speaking and cheerful facade. I feel that he's being genuine at that moment and is truly regretful when he and his group members are faced with one of the grim possibilities of phantom metal performance. Given the amount of foreshadowing that this revelation has in previous dramas, I've always felt that the delivery's just been really weak because of the imbalance of the focus between the two units, and I think that the anime also did kind of a poor job with it as well. I think the best out of all three, the drama tracks, stage show, and the anime, the stage show did it the best, and it's absolutely thanks to the performance of Iori's actor. On that note, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Next time we'll be talking about the dramatic conclusion of Paradox Live's first season in the live drama. Live. Either way, it's that one. I'll catch you later, heads.